All right, welcome back to EYC Chalk Talks. This week we have Geoff Moore from North Sales who's going to talk to you a little bit about sail trim. Enjoy the talk, and I'll hand it over to Geoff.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Geoff Moore. I work for North Sales, and I've been racing sailboats competitively all my life. I'm originally from Newport, Rhode Island. Been involved in three winning Canada's Cups in Toronto, and recently, last September, Josh Yale and I just won the VX1 North American title. So I've got some video that we're going to show tonight that shows that. Right now I'm a little bit hot on VX1s, but I've sailed all sorts of boats all over the place. But this VX1 there was a videographer at a bunch of these events that had some great drone footage and stuff. So I'm going to play a few clips that might be useful for tonight. When I was asked to address the crowd here, they said, okay, 40 minutes or so. And I thought, well, how can I, in 40 minutes, make all of you great sailors? How can I impact your results this year? So I thought I'd just touch on a couple of fundamentals, because I'm a big proponent of, if you understand some of these key concepts, it doesn't matter what boat you're on, they're universal. They cut across every kind of a boat that you might ever be on. Anyway, so forgive me as I fumble through the presentation here. I hope I've got the right one. But I threw this slide up here because I think it kind of, to me, it relates to what we're doing in a sailboat when we're sailing upwind. By the way, I'm going to focus on upwind sailing tonight because that's the first thing we can improve on. So anyway, so a skier, I do some ski coaching in the wintertime, and you can see a skier typically uses these metal edges in a high angle against the snow to get grip so they don't just skid out. Like in a sailboat, when we're sailing upwind, the boat's always trying to slide to leeward. It's trying to, so we use our hull, shape of our hull, we use the keel, and we use our rudder to try to grip the water. And a boat that's pointing well, let's face it, we all want to point well, right? Who doesn't want to point well? Like, wouldn't it be great if we could go at full speed straight into the wind and have the best, we'd win every race. So the better we can grip the water and keep our speed up at the same time, that's what upwind performance is all about. It's how do we grip the water. And so much of our sailing, we don't think about what's happening underwater. We only think about what's above the water because we can see that. We can see the telltales, we can see the sails, and we don't necessarily know or think about what's happening underwater. So a concept that's super important for me is this, you're probably all familiar, it's called the angle of attack. Right? Anybody can tell me what angle of attack might mean? Or is it new? No? Everyone's a little shy here. So the angle of attack, in the case of a flag, would be 0. It's the angle of the flag to the wind. Like the wind flows on both sides of it, so it has a 0 angle of attack. And you can imagine taking that flag and turning it 90 degrees to the wind, it would sort of inflate, wouldn't it? It would kind of have some shape. It would stop fluttering. So we can't see the wind. We can only imagine what it is, but we can see a flag and we can see it's fluttering. And has anybody ever wondered why it flutters? Why does a flag flutter? Right? It flutters because the wind flows on both sides. But if it flowed on both sides evenly, it wouldn't flutter. So we have some variable different pressure differences. As the flag pushes to one side, the pressure builds up, creates a high pressure, and throws it to the other side, and then the reverse happens. And the sail flutters, right? So we can't see the wind, but we can see a flag fluttering. And that's the challenge we have in sailboats, right? We're trying to harness this engine, this force, but we can't see it. It's completely invisible to us. So I think it's a good idea to try to imagine the wind in our mind's eye as not being transparent or something we can't see. We can imagine it like a whole bunch of little beans, like weightless beans, floating around, and we can kind of close our eyes and picture all these beans flowing together, creating a stream, where they're all sort of equidistant apart. And as these beans are flowing towards our sail, they are equidistant apart pretty much until one of those beans, which obviously because it's moving, has some kinetic energy, and when one of those beans comes in contact with our sail, it's going to touch our sail or approach our sail, it's going to slow down or impact or stop, and it's going to give up its energy to the sail. Right? Sir Isaac Newton, for every action, there's a reaction. So that one, you can imagine that one particle hitting our sail, giving it some energy. But what happens to that little bean, that wind bean, directly behind the bean that's slowed down? Right? It's going to ram into the back of that, and then the one behind that. So what you end up with is this sort of bubble. It's an absolutely transparent, invisible bubble of high-pressure beans on the windward side of our sail. And those beans are now pushed together, creating a high pressure that they desperately want to get to the other side of the sail. The other side of the sail, the beans are sort of rarefied. They're spread out a little bit more, so that creates a low pressure. So that's how we harness energy from the wind. We have to disturb the wind. If we didn't disturb the wind at all, we wouldn't get any energy, right? But we're actually kind of bending the wind, because as those beans start to flow towards that congested area, they start bouncing off the beans around them more frequently, and they get deflected. Right? You can see this sort of little image here, the little video clip of the beans flowing around the sail. And we can take that sail and we can turn it. We can change the angle of attack. Like in this little image here, it looks like we have approximately a 45-degree angle of attack to the wind. The foil is different. You can see the high pressure side always on the windward side of our sail. And we're going to increase the angle of attack. Notice the little leech telltale on the very bottom left of the sail. It's fluttering just like the flag was. Oop, that was the... All right, so here, watch it. We increase the angle of attack in this clip here. By the way, these are from the North U. This is just a little bit of a teaser for that course. You notice the leech telltale. What's happening here? The leech telltale. What do we call this state? Stall. Right. Pardon? They're struggling. Yeah, the beans are struggling here. So what happens is, as we increase the angle of attack, as we turn the sail into the flow of wind, the beans tend to pile up and increase, and that big invisible bubble grows and grows and grows. At some point, that high pressure wants to get to the other side of the sail so desperately, it has to find a way to do that. The beans can't get around the front of the sail, the luff of the sail, because there's beans coming on all the time. They can't crawl upwind against the flow of beans. So the only avenue that big invisible bubble of beans has to get to the leeward side is around the back. Right? And that's why that telltale, you see that red telltale, leech telltale, flips around and it demonstrates stall. Right? That concept right there, if you're unfamiliar with that concept, it will rock your world. It'll change the way you think about sailing. Let me try to present it in a different way, right? This is again, I didn't use any numbers here. It's a graph, so let's not get scared. But across the bottom here, I'm going to plot on the x-axis the angle of attack. On the left side is 0, and we're going to go to 90 degrees. So what is the left side going to look like if I had a sail and I'm at 0 angle of attack? Anybody? Pardon? No trim. Yeah, but what would it look like if I had a 0? Luffing, yeah, like a flag, just like the flag. The flag had a 0 angle of attack, right? All right, now I'm going to slowly start at a luffing sail or a flag, and I'm going to move to the right a little bit. And as I move to the right, I'm trimming it in, or maybe maybe the sail is cleated and I'm turning the boat down, but I'm increasing the angle of attack. I'm just pulling it in, right? What's the first thing that happens when you do that? So even before the boat moves. Yeah, it fills, right? The sail inflates. Right? Now, why would it inflate? There couldn't be a more obvious proof that there's a difference in pressure. There's a high pressure on one side. The beans are trying to get to the other side. The sail inflates. So right off the bat, we move to the right. On my y-axis, on the vertical axis, I'm going to plot the difference in pressure between the windward side and the leeward side. And we're going to call that lift. That's the lift force, right? So you can see right away there's a relationship between the angle of attack and the delta, the pressure between the windward and leeward side, the lift. As I increase the angle of attack, initially my lift force goes up. Right? So, but notice that maybe if I move just to the little bit to the right, I go up a little bit, it looks like I've got a slope of a line. Right? But what happens to that slope? It's not linear, is it? As I start to trim the sail in, what's happening? What's happening to my lift force as I slowly start to increase the trimming of the sail, or I head the boat down. I'm increasing the angle of attack. Look at the shape of that curve. It starts to accelerate up at an ever-increasing angle, right? In other words, when you get near, let's just talk about a mainsail for an example, right? As I get close to optimal trim on my mainsail, it might be 2 clicks on the winch, and I might get 30% more of the good stuff, the lift force, right? But back here at the lower left side, 2 clicks of the winch isn't going to do anything. I'm not even going to notice any increase, right? So as I get more and more towards optimal trim, the sail trim becomes more and more critical until I get to that very peak. What's that peak called? What would I call it? What's happening there? Why does the lift force, that really wonderful good stuff, hit a peak and then turn the other way? What happens? Stall, right? That's what stall is, right? Notice the shape of this curve here, right? It's a spike. It's not a plateau. It's not a round. So if I'm the main trimmer on a boat and I'm trimming the main in, there's no such thing as I'm about right? There's only one optimal angle, right? So if I, 2 clicks on the winch or a couple clicks on the ratchet block, I might be over the top and down 30% of the potential lift force that I have, right? So really good sailors understand that. That's why when you're driving a boat upwind, you got to pay attention to the telltales. You want to be always keeping the boat on the optimal, the highest point of that peak, right? When it's really windy, we don't necessarily want to have the maximum force, but in light air or moderate air, when we're trying to get the most that we can out of our sails, we want to be right at the top of that spike. It's, as I always say, it's one of the many sadistic things about sailboat racing. It's hard to keep it there. In fact, nobody can keep it there the entire upwind leg, which is good because it's hard. It's dynamic. The wind is moving around a little bit. Your sails are stretching a little bit, and they recoil back. There's little variations in puff and wind shifts. The good news is you don't have to do it perfectly, right? What do you have to do it? How well do you have to do that? Yeah, better than everybody else. That's easy, right? That's all you have to do is just keep it at that top of that spike, just a little bit more often or a little bit longer than everybody else, and you'll do really well in the race. This concept, so I don't want anyone to leave this here tonight without this burned into your brain. This concept, that vision of that spike there, we're going to call the verge of stall. Like that's the maximum power you can get out of any sail, jib, genoa, any boat. Right? The verge of stall is the maximum. And I'm only looking at one of 2 things, the angle of attack and the lift force. Right? There's all sorts of strings and adjustments on a boat, but this is just the basics, right? The very fundamental thing. And if you don't have that concept of verge of stall, how could you possibly trim a mainsail? How could you possibly know when to stop trimming the jib, right? So in light air, your objective is to keep it at the verge of stall. Right? So don't forget that phrase. You're gonna, if you see me walking down the dock this summer, just look at me and go verge of stall. I'll give you the thumbs up, right? Because it's something I work on all the time. And of course, one thing else about this little graph here, from the top of that spike, at the very top of that spike, everything to the left, what does my leech telltale look like on my sails? Streaming, right? So from the top of that spike, everything to the left of that graph, my telltales on the back of my sail are just looking like a flag. At the top of that spike, everything to the right, it looks like what? It's curled around the back. Right, so it's either on or off. That's the only, again, the wind is invisible, so we can only see whether that telltale is either streaming back or it's not. Right, so what that looks like in practice is here's a little animation here. Here's a sail. The telltales are now it's over trimmed. We're in stall. Now it's under trim. We want to trim it right. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Right. You see how those telltales come in and out of stall? They're flicking in and out of stall. That's the verge of stall. That's what we're looking for, right? If you can maintain that, throughout the entire upwind leg, and it's not too windy, that verge of stall is gold. Now, when it's really windy, you're not going to trim it that hard because you're going to have other problems, right? You're going to heel over too much. We'll come back to that. So here's a robot holding a piece of plywood, and you can see there's an angle of attack from the plywood to the wind beams, and you can even stall it. Oh, it's getting smart. You know, by putting a bend in it, you can create a lot more pressure. Whoops, too much pressure, right? So by putting shape into our sails, by making our sails deeper, right, we can collect more beans. We can make that pressure differential even bigger. You know, let's face it, if you're having beans for dinner tonight, are you going to use a knife or are you going to use a spoon? Right? A spoon is like a deep sail, right? We're going to collect more beans there, right? It's some half the regatta at the EX1 North Americans was pretty light to moderate, flat water. These boats are underpowered, right? They are all sailing with their sails as deep as they can, all in both sails, jib and main, at the verge of stall. If they're not, well, those are the boats in the back of the fleet, right? The top 10 boats are all sailing with the sails as deep as they can make them, as deep as is proper, and their leech telltales right here would be flicking in and out of stall. And some very good sailors in that fleet who are very capable of doing that. But it begs the question, if a deep sail is going to catch more beans than light air, is it possible to be too deep? Yeah, it's just someone nodding here. How would you define a sail that's too deep? Right, so it would be inefficient, you know, too deep, yeah. So deep sails are very, create a lot of drag when they're going through the wind. Sails have to go upwind with you through the wind, and a big fat sail creates a big bulbous sail has to move against the oncoming beans for a large part, so that creates a lot of drag, right? But because the drag is so small compared to what the drag is of the water, like in light air, the problem is we don't have much wind. We don't have much energy, and we're trying to push these boats through this kind of syrupy fluid we call water, right? And there's a lot of friction getting through that water, so we want to get as much torque as we can. So a deep bulbous sail is actually a pretty good tool to do that. Because the windage isn't going to be the problem. It's the water drag underneath. So let me give you a definition. It's possible. Is it possible to trim a sail or to correct a sail that's luffing in the front, right? The front of the sail is luffing, and the back of the sail is under stall at the same time. Luffing and stalling at the same time. What angle of attack would I trim that sail? Right? No answer, right? There is no answer. It's a trick question, right? You can't trim a sail. If a sail is luffing, and the leech is stalling, if I trim it in more or increase the angle of attack more, the leech is just going to stall even more. If the leech is stalled and I let it out, I decrease the angle of attack to get the leech telltale flicking in and out of stall. The whole front of the sail will be luffing. That sail is too deep, right? So now we've identified one limit to our sail shape, right? We can make a sail that's too deep, that's luffing and stalling at the same time. That happens sometimes, probably most notably when people sail upwind in light air and they ease their outhaul too far. You can see a little bit of backwind in your main, a little bubble in the front of your main, and your lower batten is like 90 degrees to the boat. It's like cocked to windward, and the whole bottom part of your sail, the leech is stalled, but the front is backwinding or luffing a little bit. Sometimes you see it as if you get a tall, narrow jib, sometimes the tops of the jibs, when they age, they get really round and deep, and it becomes impossible to trim them because they're too deep. You're either going to luff it or you're going to stall it, or you're going to do both, right? So that's important to know. So there's a limit to how deep you can make a sail. So, these guys underpowered or overpowered? Overpowered, I'm hearing. I don't think anybody had any doubts. This is footage from the Sydney Hobart race. They had I think it must have been a helicopter. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm out in conditions like this, which I don't do very often, but I don't see too many photographers around, right? Usually when it's that nasty, you don't get much, you don't get a lot of footage. This was some amazing footage. You had the bright orange sails that's a storm trysail there, and you see storm jibs. And you know, I've honestly, I've never had the misfortune to have to resort to that in my travels so far. I probably just jinxed myself. So it can be that there's so much wind, we don't want to maximize the power that's available to us in wind, right? Right. So do we want to be at the top of the graph, the top of that spike? Do we want to be on the verge of swell? No, absolutely not. What would happen if as we approach that? What happens? People are like, yeah, you start to heel over, right? That your boat only has so much ballast, right? So at some point, as the wind increases, we have to do something to control our heeling, right? One way we could do it would just sort of turn up into the wind and luff our sails a little bit, right? You wouldn't heel if you were luffing your sails, right? But you wouldn't go anywhere. You'd go really, really, really slow. You might go sideways. You know, if it was really windy and you left too high, you might start backing up. Right? So you're not going to win any races if that's your only tool, like luffing into the wind, right? But it is a little bit of a tool. When we first start to heel a little bit, the first thing sailors do is they go into feather mode. They might sail on the inside of their jib. Let the front of the jib luff just a little bit. Feathering, right? They can control the angle of heel initially. They'll put the crew to hiking out at that point, right? But then they're faced with a couple of ways to shed power. What are some ways to get rid of some extra lift force? Let your sail out, yep. Yeah, let the sail out. Yeah, same thing. Decrease the angle of attack. Traveler down would be another way. If we flatten the sail, right? And there's one other way. There's only 3 ways to shed power. Outhaul, that's another way of flattening, right? Twist, halyard. You guys are missing a big one. It's really windy. What are these guys doing here? Smaller sails, right? So there's only 3 ways to get rid of power, right? And it works in progression, okay? So it's flatten the sails, flatten, flatten, flatten. And then when you're done flattening and you don't have any more flattening left, then you start to let them out. And then at some point to get so far out, you're faster, you're lower drag with smaller sails, right? So in that progression, right? So it's not complicated. Not like I want deep sails and let them out. No, just make them flatter, 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 as flat as you can. And then at that point, you got to start letting them out. Because I can't keep turning the boat up into the wind or my boat speed will drop, right? So at some point I have to let them out and then eventually I have to put a reef in, right? So that's the progression, right? Flatter, let them out, and then smaller sails in that order, right? One way to flatten is there's only a couple ways to flatten, but one way is just to bend the mast, right? If we bend the mast, can you see as the middle of that mast thrusts forward, it's pulling some of the belly out of the sail, some of the draft out of the sail. And sometimes we use that terminology, belly or draft or power. When they say power, that's what they mean, like the volume of that sail. If that sail were horizontal and filled with water, how much water would it hold, right? The volume. Sometimes it's, they call it grunt. In some places in the southern hemisphere, they just make up words all the time. Every time I talk to one of those guys, it's a new word, right? So anyways, bending the mast is just one way to flatten a sail. But we talked about the limit on how deep we can make a sail. What's the limit on how flat we can make a sail? Can we make a sail flatter than flat? No, flat is a pretty hard limit, right? When you're talking about flat is flat. There's no such thing as flatter than flat, right? If you were trying to do something flatter than flat, we would say it would invert, or turn inside out, right? That's what's happening here with this mainsail, this little clip, right? You just look at the picture there. See how the middle of the mast is being thrust forward so much that it's pulling tight between the end of the boom and that point of maximum bend, right? That sail is turning inside out. It's flatter than flat. This is a good friend of mine. It was his first day with the boat. They were just trying to get used to it, and I just looked at that main trim, and I just cringed, right? So they had too much backstay on. They had too much backstay. The backstay pulls down on the tip of the mast, the middle thrusts forward, and the fabric just pulled tight. It exceeded what the sail could absorb with mast bend, right? So that's another limit. So when a sail's too flat, it turns inside out. And when it's too deep, you end up with luffing and stalling at the same time, right? And what's interesting about that is that about probably 90% of the time that you're out sailing, you'll be either in one or two states. You want the sails as deep as you can because it's light air, or very quickly you'll exhaust all the flattening and you just sails as flat as you can make them, right? And then you're letting them out, right? It's only that little narrow wind range in between underpowered and overpowered where you're actually changing the shape of the sails. You're reducing the grunt. You're making the sails flatter and maybe fuller. And so in the light stuff, you might make it a little fuller. In the puffs, you might make it a little flatter. We call that shifting gears. And that happens depending on the boat, because every boat has different characteristics, different ballast and whatnot. But that might happen in, it might start happening in about 9 or 10 knots. Your crew's fully hiked, you're feathering a little bit, and there's just a little too much heel. I don't want to let the sails out because they're still deep. But I put some back. Now I have to make them flatter. Outhaul, jib car back, and maybe some backstay or mast bend, whatever bends your mast, right? And then very quickly, probably in 12 knots of wind for most boats, sails are already fully flat. Maybe it's 13 or knots or something. At some point, I've exhausted all the flattening, and then I got to let the sail out a little bit, right? So which sail do I let out first? New concept, right? So in other words, okay, so it's gotten windy. The first thing, let's go through the progression, right? So the first thing I do, the wind comes up, I feather a little bit, I put the crew on the high side, and all of a sudden now that as the wind is coming up, I'm sailing upwind, I'm forced to feather. I'm feathering so much now, it's turning into what? What do we call that when the skipper sails too high? Pinching, right? Like I'm still yet to come up with a very clear definition between feathering and pinching. They tend to bleed over to each other. To me, pinching is when the boat speed starts to drop, right? So I don't want to go into pinching. So I as a driver, I don't want to pinch. I want to pinch. I got to do something because I can't. If I heel over anymore, the boat will start to, the keel will come out of the water. Let's face it, capsize is dead slow, right? So as we get closer to capsizing, that's not good. So there's a certain angle I heel. I don't want to heel any more than that, right? So therefore, I will, at some point, I got to do something. So the first thing I'm going to do is what? No, don't ease the main out yet. We haven't done something. What do we want to do first? Flatten, right? That's the progression, right? Too many people will take a deep sail and dump it. No. We just want to flatten it. Keep it trimmed in tight. Make it flatter until we're done flattening it. Until we don't have anything left. And then we ease the main out, right? And it's usually the main that gets eased out at that point because it's right there, right? Just you ease it out till the boat levels off. The heel goes away. We pull it back in, and we're sort of balancing the heel on the main trim. Another way to make a sail deep is by sagging our headstay, right? If this is a shot looking straight up, it's a Beneteau 36.7. I think that's Zingara out of National Yacht Club, 4-time North American champion. I'm just eyeballing that. That looks to me about 6 inches of headstay sag. That's probably right in the middle of their spectrum. You can never pull a headstay so it has zero sag. Like zero sag would be, I don't care, how much pressure you put on that headstay, it's always going to be sagging a tiny little bit at some point, right? But on that boat, and most of the boats that we sail around here, 10 or 11 inches of headstay sag is maximum, right? And you're not really, it's hard to see from the back of the boat. You gotta go right up on the bow and take a look. Look right, just like that picture is right there. So that's a kind of a medium light setting for that boat. I have a little video clip I'd like to play here. 11 or 12 knots of breeze. About 4 minutes long. As you can make the sails. If the wind continues to build from there, what do? We still. It doesn't matter what you do with the sails at that point. But that keel, hull, and rudder cannot sail any higher to the wind than that boat speed will allow. So you can let the sails way out if you have to maintain the angle of heel. You just can't turn the boat higher into the wind because the boat will slow down immediately. We can tell the balance of the boat is right when we have about 2 or 3 degrees of rudder angle. If you're sailing upwind and you could let go of your tiller extension, the boat would go straight. That's not right. That's not a balanced boat. That means the rudder is doing nothing but dragging behind the boat. What you want to do is get a little lift on that rudder. There needs to be a little bit of angle required. You know, a way of imagining that, the whole boat is sliding to leeward. The keel is keeping the bow from sliding to leeward, and the rudder should be keeping the stern from sliding to leeward. So when you have about 2 or 3 degrees of rudder angle upwind, and the boat is at full speed, you know, you're at optimal trim. Usually when it's windy like that, my boat speeds tend to be in the low 6s, 6.4 knots or something like that. When I'm in overpowering condition, I'm starting to see 5/8 for time to do something. If I just head down and do nothing, the boat's just going to heel over too much. If you're sailing with a 3-person team, have that middle person play the main sheet. It's surprising how much upper body motion there can be. You have to play that main sheet aggressively to maintain that 7 or 8 degree angle of heel. It's very easy to get a little lazy, not let the main out as quick, forcing the skipper to feathering too much, crossing over from feathering to pinching. Here's an example of 2 boats sailing upwind, feathering their jibs, but not using their mains enough. I think they'd be moving through the water much faster if they would just sheet out the main and maybe trim the jib in a little bit. I don't see any backwind in the main. As soon as the main's going out a little bit, that jib car has to start moving to leeward. I kind of judge that on the interaction or the backwind of the main. I need a little bit of backwind. I need to know that the jib is interacting with the main, and if it's not, then the jib car needs to come up. But in one eye, I'm kind of monitoring the boat speed and not just looking at the digital display. I'm actually sensing, is the boat decelerating or is it accelerating? And those little subtle cues are kind of hard to pick up. If you're only looking at the Vacros or your instrumentation, you're 3 or 4 seconds late. It's not a lag in the sensitivity of the instrument. It's a lag in the boat's mast, you know, trying to accelerate that boat or the boat decelerating. It takes a little bit of time. The problem is, as we sheet out the main further and further and further, it starts to fall into the backwind of the jib. And when the main goes completely soft or flogging, that creates an out of balance problem. Now the only thing pulling the boat is the jib that's up in the bow. It's trying to pull the bow downwind, forcing the skipper to push the tiller away from you to keep the boat going upwind. A luffing main creates a lot of drag, and the boat performance starts to drop off faster and faster and faster. That's part of a little clip of a couple of videos I've done over the course of the winter to try to coach some of our new VX1 sailors. But the principles are the same. There are a couple little nuanced differences, but you know, the idea that when you're sailing upwind, the boat is always slipping to leeward. There's always leeway. It doesn't feel like it when you're sailing, but if it weren't slipping to leeward, there would be no pressure on the leeward side of our keel. The keel is gripping the water, just like that skier is with the high edge angle on that ski. It's gripping the water. The more we grip the water, the less we slide to leeward, and it feels like we're pointing higher than everyone else. Pointing comes from grip to the water, not from just aiming the boat higher into the wind. You know, people will try. They'll see somebody else pointing high, and they'll try to match the angle. They'll steer the boat higher into the wind, and then the boat slows down. And the more it slows, the more the keel loses grip with the water, the more it slides to leeward, right? So really, upwind performance is really all about how well you can grip the water, right? And we don't have telltales underwater, right? So I want you to think about as the boat's sailing upwind, it's sliding to leeward, and the keel is somewhat towards the front of the boat. So it's got good grip. So the front of the boat is being buoyed up by the lift of the keel. The keel's gripping the water. It's trying to pull the bow up. And what do we call that? When you're sailing upwind and the boat's trying to turn into the wind, what do we call that? Rounding up. What's the other word I'm looking for? Weather helm, right? Ever hear that term, weather helm? Weather helm means that when you drop the tiller, the boat goes right into attack, right? That's basically the stern of the boat sliding to leeward faster than the bow of the boat is, right? So by using a little bit of rudder angle, about 2 or 3 degrees, it's a tiny little bit, but that gives the rudder some grip to the water. If you could let go of your rudder and it goes straight, I mean, and that would mean there's pressure equally on both sides. There would be no lift on your rudder, and it would just be dragging through the water. But if it's going to drag through the water, you might as well get a little bit of lift out of that. And that's how we can monitor how well our keel is grabbing the water. Because if I'm driving upwind and suddenly my rudder goes mushy, what's that a sign of? Or maybe my boat's suddenly trying to head down, and I have to push the tiller away from me. Right? What's happening there? Right? It might be that the keel has gone right up to the verge of stall, past the verge of stall because I was pinching, and the keel has lost grip with the water and it's sliding to leeward. The bow is falling off, and suddenly now my rudder's got either no helm or negative helm. Suddenly I have to push it the opposite way. I got lee helm, which is disastrous for performance. The whole boat's sliding to leeward very quickly now, right? But when things are working well, the keel is pulling the bow up into the wind. I just need a little bit of rudder angle to compensate, and that's when the boat's trimmed at its best. You know, when we're at full speed. If I got too much grip of the water from my keel, I might have too much weather helm. Right? But there's all that wonderful, lovely information is coming right up that rudder stock, right into your hand. Let's make sure it gets from my hand to your brain, right? And think about it. Like, okay, what's going on here, right? If I don't have any rudder, how come? If I've got a boat with a wheel and the boat's out of the water right now, perfect time to get a protractor out. Where's 3 degrees? And put a mark on your wheel. You know, you probably have a mark already at top dead center when your rudder is straight. Turn it 3 degrees and put a mark on either side of the wheel so you know where that is. The other concept that was in that clip, if you notice, there's one boat sailing with a jib full and like nothing in the main. The main was completely flogging, right? You guys pick up on that? I see a lot of people at club sailing, and when it gets windy, that's what they end up doing. They let the main out because they're heeling too much, right? And then they let the main out. The main goes completely loose, and the boat's still heeling too much, right? Okay, that throws the boat totally out. What do they have to do when that happens? Yeah, you've got to get the jib away from the main a little bit. The jib is too close to the main. In other words, I have to let the main out. I've already made the sails flat, and that wasn't enough. The boat's still heeling. Now I let the main out, and the main falls into the backwind or the bent wind beam stream, right? The jib is bending the wind, and the main is now falling into that zero, and it's got a zero angle of attack. So the only thing pulling the boat is the jib. It's up on the bow. It's trying to pull the bow down, creating, the boat's now out of balance. Now I have to push the rudder away from me. Right? So if I could just ease that jib out a little tiny bit, just so that the main can fly, right? That would make all the difference in the world. Why don't people want to let their jib out when it's windy? Point. Yeah. If people are desperate because they're like, oh, if I let my sail out, I won't point. Right? I think we'll catch that a little bit of that clip here. This is without the audio. You'll see a little bit of backwind is not a problem. A little bit of backwind, a little interaction is just fine. But when that backwind rolls all the way through the mainsail, and it goes completely soft or loose, that's when drag, like a luffing sail, is just terrible for drag, right? And it also throws the boat out of balance. These boats have a little bit of backwind just for short periods of time are probably okay, right? But you just don't want to see like in the other clip where we had that main completely unloaded. There it is. Yep. See that? I better not see you guys sailing like that this summer, right? We'll have words afterwards if I do. All you got to do is ease that jib just a little bit to settle the main down, right? So if I pull the main in, the boat's just going to heel over too much, right? If I heel the main in and stick it up into the wind, I'm going to slow down, right? So people don't want to let their jib out because they're convinced they won't point. Those are the people trying to aim the boat into the wind to get pointing. Aiming the boat, that means they're going to put their keel beyond the verge of stall, and the boat speed's going to crash. So being able to let your jib out just a little bit, you don't want to dump it, you don't want it completely luffing, just enough so you can fly the back part of your main. And that keeps the boat in balance, and you'll be able to sail at much higher wind speeds comfortably because the boat will want to go straight. You'll get steerage. Anybody who comes into my office with questions about heavy air sailing is going to see this picture. I pull this picture up in almost every talk I give these days. This was Zingara is in the background on port tack with the black sails. I'm on board. This is the Beneteau 36-7 North Americans a number of years ago out of on Lake St. Clair at a Bayview Yacht Club. And the scene is that the Chuck Bears in the foreground on Grizzly. We're pretty much tied for the regatta at this point. There's this race and one more left in the series, and then it's over. And the two of us have a bit of a breakaway on the rest of the fleet, so we got kind of involved in the pre-start, circling each other a little bit. And both of us have 155% Genoas up. And at about 4 minutes to go, this squall blew through, and the entire race, the wind never dropped below 28 knots. It probably peaked in the low 30s. So we had way too much sail up, right? But the wind came on fast and strong, and I was just happy that we had the same sail up as our competitor did. The boat on starboard tack in the distance, they got their little jib up in time. We were so involved with circling, but as long as we had the same sails up as our competition, now it just comes down to skill. It's not we're still in the game. We can still win, even though we got too much sail up. But look at the difference between our angle of heel in the background and the angle of heel in the foreground. Who's heeling more? The foreground boat, Grizzly, right? They're heeling a little bit more. Who's pointing higher? We are in the background, right? By a lot. Right, so I guarantee you the people on the rail of Grizzly right now are very sheepishly, reluctantly saying to the skipper, they're pointing a little higher. Right? Skippers don't want to hear bad news in the middle of a race, right? They're pointing a little higher. So what has he done? He sent his crew down there to do what? Tighten his Genoa, pull it in even tighter, right? He thinks pointing is going to come from trimming its sails and aiming higher into the wind. Look at his main. Look at the main in the foreground. Look familiar? Just like the video clip we were showing. Right? Yeah, it's not doing anything. It'd be faster if you took it down, right? It's just a flag right now, right? right? Right. So look at our main in the background. I think we're eased significantly further, but it's not luffing like that, is it? It's hard to tell. The resolution, it's a black sail, but it's definitely not flogging. And I remember that situation. Our jib at that point is, there's two sets of spreaders. The top of our jib is like 6 feet off our top spreader. It's way, the lead is all the way back as far as it'll go, and the top of the sail is way out. Right? It was out far enough so that we could fly our main. Right? And so now our boat in the background had a little bit of pressure on the back of the main, a little bit of pressure on the back of the Genoa, but it was balanced right over the keel. And the skipper, I mean, the driving, and if you're driving in 30 knots of wind, like you head down a little bit too much, what's going to happen? If you head down and your sail fills up a little more, wham, you're going to heel over really quickly. And if you head up a little bit, the sail's already eased and flat. The sail's all the power's going to dump right out. So the driving becomes super critical. It's like it takes 100% of your concentration just to keep the angle of heel consistent the windier it gets. But our boat in the background, once you get the boat going that direction, the driving gets critical, but you can drive it, you can steer it. The boat in the foreground, there's no load on the main whatsoever, so the Genoa is dragging the bow down. The boat bears off a little bit, so the skipper says, I don't want to head down. It's blowing 30 knots. Right? If I head down, the boat's going to capsize. Right? So the driver goes full left rudder, the Genoa is trying to pull the bow down. The driver's making a hard left turn, trying to hold the bow up, and then the boat heels over, and it starts to go into a little bit of a broach. Now the boat wants to spin up into the wind, into attack. So now it's like, whoa, I don't want to attack. So they go hard right rudder. So that boat in the foreground is going rudder stop to rudder stop just to keep the boat reasonably straight, right? Because it's out of balance, right? So there's a ton of information here in this picture. Remember, both boats are going forward and sliding to leeward, right? And our rudder on our boat has about 3 or 4 degrees of rudder angle, and it's going straight. And we crushed them in this race. This is shortly after the start. By the second beat, we were almost a full leg ahead of them. Okay, that's sort of end with this little some downwind sailing. We didn't get to talk about it, but these are these wonderful little VX1s. They're quite lively. There's about 20 of them at EYC. There's a couple around here. There's about 300 boats in the world right now, and our North Americans will be in Miami in November. And hopefully not too many of the shows actually watched my video clip, so I got a shot at winning it in November. Anyways, thanks a lot, everybody, and good luck this season, and have a lot of fun. Take care.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I guess we got a couple hats here. So without lying, who's going to be racing at EYC for their first year this year? I think, how many hats do we have? Got one here. No, Jim's been around for a while. Kelly, you're coming here for your first year. Thanks everybody for coming out. Next week we've got Irene McNeil, and she's going to talk about kind of the experience on the race committee boat and how that kind of shapes what you see as a competitor on the course. So this week we went from a bit of a technical side to kind of supplement all of this. And next week we'll be looking at what to expect on the start line, what different flags mean, all that kind of stuff. So remember, these are all available on YouTube. So once they're actually done live, they're available to watch again. So lots of stuff here, thanks to Geoff today. And you'll be able to watch it all over again if you missed a bit, or if you kind of need to get a bit of a refresher before the season starts. But for those of you with a wheel, sounds like make some marks on the upper side and figure out where that 3 degrees is. But thanks again, everybody, for coming, and thanks, Geoff, for leading us through this. Have a great evening.